What do I like better, poetry or basketball? My God, that's like you know, that's like a little bit like having to choose your favorite Menendez brother. In the same way like an athlete has to train and has to stay in shape all the time, I think it's important for poets to stay in shape, to stay in physical shape, to exercise, just as a way of staying fresh and clearing out all of the stagnant stuff that accumulates over the course of a day, of a week, of a month. So it's important to get out and do something that has nothing to do with poetry at all, that you also equally love to do. Here's how I became a poet. At the end of my sophomore year, I went to a dance. I ended up dancing with, without knowing it, somebody's girlfriend. He sucker punched me. I ended up in the hospital. My nose was flattened against my face. Doctor straightened it. My mother was there when I woke up next to the gurney, and she was looking through a nose book, asked the doctor if there was anything in there that looked like Robert Redford, and she chose this nose. I shaped it, put a cast on my head. I had the cast on all summer. I ran to keep in shape for basketball because I was going to move into the starting lineup in my junior year. Basketball season came around. I was wearing a hockey mask. Went diving for a loose ball, first day of practice, broke my wrist, was out for the season. I got so depressed that I started writing poetry. And once I started writing poetry, I realized, I like being depressed, and I like writing poetry, and I never looked back. I write about everyday people and everyday themes because I am an everyday person, and I live, you know, how you spend your days is how you live your life. And poetry, if it doesn't address the passions and needs and interests of your circumstances, then what's the point of doing it? My wife is a great singer, singing all the time, no matter what she's doing, walks around the house constantly singing and making up melodies as she goes along. So this poem is about that. It's called Scat. Her voice, the voice of hunger, when from another room she's singing unaware of me, or just not caring that I hear her. Hear that hunger, no one song can sate, as restlessly she wails, she croons, she rhapsodizes bebop into doo-wop, into torch song, ditty, dirge in a continuous feedback loop of words wet with their own emergence, out of sound dissolving, back to sound emerging, like a vocal time lapse. One of the principal roles that poetry plays in my life, and I think in the life of our culture, is that it is an attempt to find the best words, the most truthful words, the most beautiful words for celebration, for outrage, and for sorrow. You know, I've had my share of all of those. When I first decided that I wanted to be a teacher, when I realized that I wasn't going to make any money from my poetry directly, that if I wanted to eat, if I wanted to have a roof over my head, I was going to have to get a job, and I wanted to get a job that would interfere as little as possible with my desire to write. The students remind me all the time of where I have to be as a writer, which is at the limits of my ability, always trying new things, always with everything to learn.
My dad handed me the gift of my first gun, a .22.
As a writer, once you feel as though you've got everything mastered, you're finished. And you have to always reinvent yourself. And every year at the beginning of every semester, I start over from zero with those students. Always a more powerful rhetorical strategy to find, to tease out of the smallest object the biggest tragedy, you know. You know, when I was coming up as a writer, poetry was considered lyric, it was considered imagery, it was considered metaphor, but nobody ever talked about the sentence. The sentence, that was the domain of prose writers, of fiction writers, of essayists. And I think part of my you know, lifelong project as a writer has been to sort of regain some of the ground that has been lost to the prose disciplines over the last 100 years or so. You know, they've been rustling our cattle for a long time, so I'm trying to get it back. And one of the ways to try to get it back is through the sentence, and writing sentences that are every bit as interesting to read as any sentence that you would encounter in a novel by Henry James or George Eliot.